It all started with a letter taped to a front door. Crisp white paper, official HOA header, and a tone that only someone who enjoys writing complaints could have crafted. The message was simple but smug. Your mailbox does not comply with community standards. Please replace it within 14 days to avoid fines. For most people, this might have been a minor inconvenience. But for Nathan, it was personal. That mailbox had been more than a piece of metal holding junk mail and bills. It had been his first project after buying the house. A small wooden box, handcrafted in his garage, painted a deep blue with little yellow stars scattered across it. He'd even carved his initials into the side, a quiet signature of pride. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't offensive, and it certainly wasn't hurting anyone. But the HOA saw it differently. The letter went on to cite Section 4, Article 12, Paragraph B of the Community Aesthetic Standards, a line buried deep in the HOA's handbook that required all mailboxes to be of neutral color and standard design. No bright colors, no personal decorations, just plain, uniform boxes, like soldiers standing in formation along the curbs. Nathan had moved into the suburban maze of conformity a year earlier, chasing the quiet comfort of a cul-de-sac and the illusion of community. What he hadn't realized was that his biggest neighborly challenge wouldn't be noise or kids or parking. It would be a handful of people with clipboards and too much free time. The HOA board. The board president, in particular, was infamous. Her name was Margaret, though most of the neighborhood called her Mail Karen behind her back. A woman who took her morning walks not for exercise, but for inspection. She was known for snapping photos of trash cans left out too long, for sending polite but menacing reminders about lawn height, and for measuring Christmas lights to ensure they didn't spill onto public property. To her, Nathan's blue mailbox was an eyesore, a rebellion in a world of beige conformity. Nathan read the letter twice, then a third time, standing in silence on his porch. The air was still, heavy with late summer heat, and the distant hum of sprinklers echoed down the street. Across the road, a curtain fluttered. Margaret's window, no doubt. Watching. Waiting. He could have complied. Most people did. A quick trip to the hardware store, a new gray metal box, and the problem would disappear. But something about the tone of the letter, something about the petty nature of it, lit a quiet spark of defiance inside him. He wasn't about to let a group of strangers dictate the color of his mailbox. Instead of rushing to replace it, Nathan decided to look into the rules himself. That night, he opened the HOA handbook, all 72 pages of it, and began reading. He highlighted every mention of mailboxes, design guidelines, and permitted materials. The language was strict, but vague in certain areas. It specified that mailboxes must be neat, structurally sound, and complementary to the neighborhood aesthetic. There was no explicit ban on creativity, just a general discouragement of visual inconsistency. That phrase, visual inconsistency, stuck in his mind. It was subjective, ambiguous, and ambiguous rules, he thought, could be twisted. The next morning, he walked around the neighborhood, paying close attention to every mailbox. Some were slightly dented, others rusted. A few leaned at awkward angles. None of them looked aesthetic by any reasonable definition. Yet no one else had received a warning letter. His was the only one. It wasn't about compliance. It was about control. The HOA, it seemed, had made a habit of targeting anything that stood out, even in harmless ways. Nathan remembered a neighbor who'd once painted her front door red. Within a week, she was forced to repaint it brown because vivid colors disturbed the uniform visual flow. Another homeowner had been fined for installing a small bird bath. The reason? Unauthorized exterior modification. This wasn't about beautifying the neighborhood. It was about domination through paperwork. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Nathan sat in his garage staring at his mailbox, illuminated by the warm light of a single bulb. The blue paint still looked vibrant. The stars still gleamed faintly. It was small, simple, and personal. But if the HOA wanted it gone, if they wanted to crush individuality, then he'd give them exactly what they asked for. Something compliant, something aesthetically appropriate, something so technically within the rules that they wouldn't be able to say a word, yet so outrageously over the top that they'd choke on their own rulebook. That he began sketching. Days passed. Nathan worked quietly, carefully each evening after work, Piles of wood, metal, and paint cans began to fill his garage. He ordered a few custom parts online, all standard, all approved materials according to the HOA's own documentation. He even called the local postmaster to confirm height and placement regulations. Every inch of his design would be perfectly legal. But what he was building wasn't just a mailbox. It was a statement. By the time the 14-day deadline approached, whispers had already started. Curious neighbors noticed the activity, the late-night hammering, the strange deliveries. Some speculated he was repairing something. Others thought he might be preparing to sell the house. Margaret, of course, grew suspicious. On day 13, she sent another letter, this one more threatening. Failure to comply may result in fines of up to $250 per day. Nathan smiled when he read it. He was almost done. The morning of the deadline arrived quietly. The sun rose over neat lawns and cookie-cutter homes, the kind of perfect suburban morning the HOA prided itself on preserving. At precisely 8 a.m., Nathan walked outside with a cup of coffee and stared at the spot where his little blue mailbox had stood for a year. It was gone now. In its place stood a massive, gleaming structure. A handcrafted wooden marvel standing nearly 5 feet tall, carved with intricate designs, painted in soft cream and bronze tones that perfectly matched the approved neighborhood palette. The post was reinforced steel, wrapped in decorative molding. The mailbox itself was a miniature replica of his own house. Tiny windows, shingled roof, even a little flag by the door. Every measurement, every material, every color fell perfectly within the HOA's listed standards. It was compliant. And it was magnificent. Neighbors began to gather. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. The spectacle was impossible to ignore. Even Margaret appeared at her window, eyes narrowing in disbelief. Nathan sipped his coffee, watching as whispers turned into laughter, laughter into applause. His mailbox wasn't just compliant. It was a masterpiece. And as word began to spread through the community, Nathan knew one thing for sure. The HOA's war on creativity had just backfired spectacularly, because this was only the beginning. The following morning, the street was busier than it had been in years. Cars slowed down as drivers craned their necks to stare at the towering mailbox. Neighbors lingered longer on their morning walks, whispering and pointing. Children gathered around it like it was a new playground feature, their parents snapping pictures and chuckling quietly behind them. Nathan stood by his window, sipping coffee, watching the spectacle unfold. It was working. Not only was his new mailbox entirely legal, but it had become the talk of the neighborhood overnight. However, the attention came at a cost. By noon, a small group had gathered at the curb, the HOA inspection committee. Clipboards in hand, they circled the mailbox like vultures studying a carcass. At their center stood Margaret, immaculate as always, her hair tightly pinned, her expression a perfect blend of disapproval and suspicion. She wasn't smiling. The group took photos, measurements, notes. They whispered to each other, occasionally glancing toward Nathan's house, as if they expected him to come out and beg for forgiveness. But he didn't. He just watched from the window, calm and patient, knowing that every inch of his creation was technically compliant. Later that afternoon, he received the inevitable. Another letter slid under his door. This one was 3 pages long, an impressive effort even for the HOA. It accused him of mocking the spirit of community guidelines and creating a disruptive attraction. It claimed that the design, while technically permissible, was a visual distraction that undermines the uniformity of the neighborhood. But buried between the lines of bureaucratic fluff was the truth. They couldn't find a single actual rule he'd broken. Not one. Nathan read the letter twice, then laughed. The HOA had just declared war, and they had no ammunition. Over the next few days, the mailbox's fame grew beyond the subdivision. A neighbor posted a photo online with the caption, "Our HOA tried to make this guy remove his mailbox. Now look at it." Within hours, the post spread through local Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and even the town's community page. Comments poured in from all over, people praising the craftsmanship, mocking the HOA, and sharing their own horror stories. Suddenly, strangers were driving through the neighborhood just to see it in person. A small stream of cars slowed by the curb every evening. Some people even left small notes in the mailbox, congratulating Nathan for standing up to the HOA. Margaret, of course, was livid. At the next HOA meeting, she made the mailbox her opening agenda item. Her voice trembled with frustration as she described the growing problem of unauthorized notoriety. She claimed the structure had become a public nuisance, attracting outsiders and disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the community. But not everyone agreed. Several homeowners spoke up, praising Nathan's creativity. One even admitted that his own mailbox was rusted and crooked, asking if Nathan might build him one too. The idea spread quickly, half joking at first, then serious. By the end of the meeting, a petition had begun circulating. A petition in favor of allowing decorative mailboxes, so long as they met basic structural and safety requirements. Margaret's control was slipping. Days turned into weeks, and the street that once looked identical on every side now felt different, more alive. A few houses began adding small touches of personality. A wreath on a gate, a colorful planter, a small birdhouse. Nathan's mailbox had started something bigger than he ever intended. It was quiet rebellion, wrapped in the veneer of compliance. But the HOA wasn't done fighting. A month later, Nathan received a certified letter. It was from the HOA's lawyer, or at least someone pretending to be official. The letter accused him of commercializing private property because of the attention his mailbox had received online. It argued that the mailbox's newfound fame constituted unauthorized publicity using HOA-owned property. Since it was visible from public streets, it was absurd, laughable even, but also revealing. The HOA was desperate. Nathan responded carefully. He printed a copy of the HOA's own guidelines, highlighted the relevant sections, and attached photos proving full compliance. He even cited a few local zoning regulations to bolster his case. Then, he sent the letter directly to every board member, CCing several homeowners who had publicly supported him. Within days, word spread again. The community began to see the HOA for what it really was. Not a protector of property values, but a petty enforcer of uniformity. And the more they pushed back against Nathan, the more the community rallied around him. Local news picked up the story next. A small segment aired on the evening broadcast, featuring footage of the mailbox and interviews with amused neighbors. The headline read, "Man builds over-the-top mailbox after HOA complaint, becomes neighborhood hero." The HOA board tried to deny comment, but their silence only made them look worse. Margaret's fury reached its peak. She began walking the neighborhood twice a day now, clipboard in hand, issuing new warnings for the smallest infractions. A garden gnome here, an unapproved lawn ornament there. But her efforts backfired spectacularly. Every notice she issued became another viral story, another meme shared online. The once feared HOA had become a joke. Nathan, meanwhile, continued living his life quietly. He hadn't intended to start a movement, but now people were knocking on his door asking for advice. Could they repaint their shutters? Could they install solar lights? Could they build their own unique mailboxes? He always gave the same answer: as long as you follow the rules, yes. And one by one, the neighborhood began to change. A mailbox shaped like a lighthouse appeared 2 streets over. Another homeowner installed one painted like a little barn. Even families who'd never spoken to each other before started chatting on evening walks, trading ideas, comparing designs. The HOA tried to stop it, of course. They held emergency meetings, sent angry emails, and even attempted to pass a new rule banning non-standard exterior fixtures. But by then, it was too late. The homeowners had tasted freedom, and they weren't giving it back. Margaret stood on her porch one morning, staring down the street at the sea of colorful mailboxes. The neighborhood she once controlled had transformed into something vibrant, unpredictable, and alive. She wasn't smiling. Nathan, however, was. He watched from his own porch as the sun reflected off the cream and bronze curves of his creation, the very mailbox that started it all. He knew the HOA wouldn't stop. There would be more letters, more threats, more attempts to claw back power. But what Margaret didn't realize was that she'd already lost. Because Nathan's mailbox wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a symbol, and symbols, once born, can't be fined out of existence. Still, as Nathan would soon discover, the HOA had one last trick up its sleeve. One final attempt to reclaim their authority, no matter how underhanded it had to be. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood that once looked identical from house to house now shimmered with color and character. Mailboxes became miniature works of art, tiny castles, rustic cottages, even a few that looked like cartoon animals. Each one followed the HOA's rules on dimensions, placement, and materials, yet each broke free from the monotony the board had tried so hard to preserve. What had begun as one man's quiet act of defiance had turned into a movement. For a time, things seemed peaceful. The HOA had gone unusually quiet, retreating into silence after their failed legal threats and the wave of homeowner support that followed. Margaret was seen less frequently, and when she did walk the neighborhood, she did so without her usual clipboard. Her confidence seemed to have withered under the weight of public ridicule. But peace rarely lasts long where pride is involved. One morning, Nathan woke to find a bright orange notice staked into his lawn. The words were bold, printed in heavy black ink, "Notice of Non-Compliance." Underneath, in smaller text, it claimed that his mailbox was being removed for posing a safety hazard and violating visibility standards. It was nonsense, of course. His mailbox had been inspected by the city when the local news covered it. They'd confirmed it met every regulation. The only hazard it posed was to the HOA's ego, and yet, according to the notice, the board had scheduled its removal for the following morning. Nathan stared at the paper, the quiet rage in his chest giving way to something colder, determination. He'd seen the HOA bend rules before, but this was a new low. They were fabricating violations now. He knew what this meant. The board had decided to take matters into their own hands, even if they had to bend the law to do it. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He set up a small security camera in his window trained on the mailbox. It was connected to his phone. If anyone touched it, he'd know instantly. He had a feeling something was coming, and he wasn't wrong. At 5:12 a.m., headlights flickered across his lawn. A white pickup truck rolled quietly down the street, stopping right in front of his house. Two men in reflective vests stepped out, one of them carrying a crowbar, the other a clipboard. They weren't city workers. They weren't postal service employees. They were HOA contractors. Nathan watched from behind the curtain as they approached the mailbox, muttering to each other, trying to look official. They didn't know they were being filmed. The first man pried at the mailbox post while the second scribbled something on the clipboard. The steel base didn't budge. It had been built to last. Frustrated, the man with the crowbar swung harder, leaving a visible dent in the wooden trim. The sound echoed through the quiet morning, and one by one, porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Within minutes, neighbors began to step outside, pulling on jackets, confused and angry. Someone shouted, asking what they were doing. The men ignored the question, muttering that they were authorized by the HOA. Nathan opened his front door, calm but firm. He didn't need to say a word. The camera in his hand said it all. By the time the HOA's so-called contractors realized what was happening, it was too late. The footage had already been uploaded live. A neighbor streamed the confrontation to the local Facebook group, and within an hour it was spreading faster than wildfire. The video showed everything. The unauthorized removal attempt, the damage, the angry neighbors defending Nathan's property. Comments poured in by the thousands, most expressing outrage, others disbelief. Even people from outside the community began chiming in, tagging local reporters and city officials. By noon, the story had reached the news again. This time, it wasn't about a funny mailbox. It was about an HOA gone rogue. The HOA board tried to defend themselves, claiming they'd acted in the interest of public safety. But the city inspector quickly debunked that claim on record. The mailbox, he confirmed, was 100% compliant. The damage, however, was now a legal matter because the HOA had no authority to remove private property without consent. Margaret, the president, was cornered. Reporters showed up at her house, asking for comment. Her only response was to slam the door in their faces. The once powerful leader of the neighborhood now hid behind her curtains as the world outside tore apart the reputation she'd built on intimidation. Within a week, the fallout began. The HOA's lawyer resigned after reviewing the footage. Two board members quit shortly after, citing ethical concerns. Homeowners demanded an emergency meeting to vote on dissolving the board entirely. The motion passed with overwhelming support. For the first time in years, the HOA was gone. In the weeks that followed, life in the neighborhood changed for good. Without the constant surveillance of the board, people began to take more pride in their homes, not less. Lawns were kept neat, but with personality. Gardens flourished. Kids painted murals on backyard fences. What had once been a neighborhood defined by sameness became a mosaic of individuality. And through it all, Nathan's mailbox still stood, repaired and freshly polished. The dent from the crowbar remained as a small scar on its base. A reminder of what it had survived. It became something more than a mailbox now. The local paper wrote an article calling it "The Mailbox That Ended an HOA." A small plaque appeared next to it one day, placed there by a neighbor, in celebration of freedom, creativity, and the courage to stand up to nonsense. Tourists passing through sometimes stopped to take pictures. Even the mail carrier treated it with reverence, slipping letters inside like it was a piece of history. As for Margaret, she eventually moved away. Her house sold quietly without ceremony. The new owners repainted it a bright shade of yellow, a color she would have never approved of. Nathan stayed. He didn't see himself as a hero, just a homeowner who'd refused to back down. Every morning, he still walked outside with a cup of coffee, nodding to neighbors as they passed. They always smiled back. The street, once silent and sterile, now buzzed with life, laughter, chatter, the hum of creativity. Sometimes, Nathan would look at his mailbox and chuckle. What had started as a simple act of defiance had turned into something much bigger, a quiet revolution against control, carried out not with anger, but with craftsmanship and patience. In the end, the HOA hadn't been defeated by lawyers or fines. It had been defeated by its own absurdity, exposed for the hollow authority it was, and the symbol of that victory, a single handcrafted mailbox, still stood tall at the edge of the curb, catching the morning light like a trophy. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest battles can change everything.